Jake Martinez spent 6 hours each day in what Dr. Lisa Chen called quantum meditation. He would sit perfectly still in his quarters with his eyes closed, letting his mind process probability matrices that existed beyond normal human understanding. His notebook lay open beside him, filled with equations that seemed to write themselves as his enhanced consciousness explored mathematical dimensions. The changes in Jake's brain had accelerated since the victory at mining station Omega-7. Dr. Chen monitored him daily and recorded observations that fascinated and worried her in equal measure. Jake's neural pathways were forming new connections at an unprecedented rate. His ability to process quantum information was expanding far beyond anything she had seen in medical literature. Amy Collins watched Jake during one of his meditation sessions and felt a strange mixture of pride and fear. Her friend was becoming something extraordinary, but she worried that he was leaving his humanity behind. When Jake opened his eyes after these sessions, they sometimes seemed to contain depths that had not been there before. "How do you feel?" Amy asked when Jake emerged from his latest meditation. Jake wrote slowly in his notebook. "I can see the quantum foam that underlies reality, every particle, every wave function, every probability cloud. The universe is mathematics and I am learning to read the equations." Amy tried to understand, but the concepts were beyond her. "Are you still Jake Martinez from Ohio who used to fix old motorcycles and eat too much pizza?" Jake smiled and wrote, "Yes, but also more. The damage to my voice opened pathways to something larger. I am still human, but I am becoming something else too." The Coalition's recent victories had been spectacular. Jake's tactical guidance had led to successful defenses of 12 strategic positions and the liberation of 3 occupied worlds. Zanari forces were beginning to show signs of confusion and hesitation. For the first time since the war began, Coalition morale was high. But the enemy was adapting. Zanari quantum analysts had identified the source of their tactical failures and were developing countermeasures specifically designed to target enhanced human consciousness. Jake could sense their preparations during his meditations, but the mathematics were becoming increasingly complex and dangerous. General Ray Foster called an emergency briefing after intelligence reports confirmed that the Zanari Empire was preparing a massive offensive. The Coalition High Command had decided to make their stand at Titan's Ring, a strategic star system that controlled access to the core Coalition worlds. "This will be the largest space battle in galactic history," General Foster told the assembled officers. "The Zanari are committing their entire fleet to break through our defenses. If we lose at Titan's Ring, the war is over." Jake sat quietly during the briefing, writing calculations in his notebook. The quantum mathematics for such a large engagement were staggering in their complexity. Thousands of variables, millions of probability vectors, and countless decision matrices all interacting in real time. He would need to push his enhanced abilities to their absolute limits. Commander Vexka approached Jake after the meeting ended. The Thakari officer had become one of Jake's strongest supporters and had assigned his best troops to protect the silent human during battles. "Can you handle an engagement of this magnitude?" Commander Vexka asked directly. Jake wrote his answer carefully. "The mathematics are at the edge of what I can process, but I believe I can maintain tactical coordination for the main fleet elements. The challenge will be sustaining focus for the duration of the battle." Amy read Jake's words aloud and added her own concern. "What happens if you push too hard? Dr. Chen says your brain is already operating beyond normal human limits." Jake's response was sobering. "If I exceed my processing capacity, I risk permanent neural damage or death. But if I do not try, we lose the war and billions die. The choice is not difficult." 3 days later, the Coalition fleet assembled at Titan's Ring. 500 ships from dozens of different worlds formed defensive formations around the massive space stations that controlled the system. Jake positioned himself on the command bridge of the flagship with Amy and her enhanced communication array. The Zanari fleet appeared at the edge of the system like a dark storm cloud. 800 warships in perfect mathematical formation, their quantum coordination creating patterns of deadly beauty against the starfield. Jake began his calculations immediately, his enhanced mind reaching out to touch the probability matrices that controlled enemy movements. The battle began with long-range weapons fire that lit up space with energy beams and plasma explosions. Jake provided tactical updates that kept coalition forces positioned optimally to avoid the worst enemy attacks while maximizing their own defensive fire. For the first hour, the engagement followed patterns similar to previous battles. Then the Zanari deployed their new weapon. Jake felt it before the sensors detected it. A quantum disruptor designed specifically to overload enhanced consciousness with mathematical chaos. Waves of paradoxical equations flooded his mind, each one designed to create infinite loops in quantum processing pathways. Pain exploded through Jake's skull as his enhanced brain tried to process information that violated the fundamental laws of mathematics. Blood ran from his nose as neural pathways overloaded and began shutting down. Amy screamed his name, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. Jake fought to maintain his tactical awareness as the quantum assault continued. Around him, the coalition fleet began losing coordination, as his guidance became sporadic and confused. Zanari ships pressed their advantage, breaking through defensive lines that had been weakened by the loss of Jake's tactical support. Dr. Chen rushed to the command bridge with emergency medical equipment. She found Jake convulsing in his chair while Amy tried desperately to keep the communication array functioning. The battle was turning into a disaster as coalition forces fell back in disarray. "I need to get him to medical bay," Dr. Chen shouted, over the noise of alarms and weapons fire. "No," Amy said firmly. "He would not want to abandon the fleet. There has to be another way." Jake's eyes opened and he grabbed his notebook with shaking hands. Blood smeared the pages as he wrote with desperate urgency. "Not attacking my mind. Attacking the mathematics itself. Need to find the source frequency." Amy read his words to Dr. Chen, who immediately understood. "The quantum disruptor has a specific resonance pattern. If Jake can identify it, he might be able to filter it out of his consciousness." Jake closed his eyes and forced his damaged mind to analyze the chaotic mathematics flooding his awareness. Each wave of quantum noise had a subtle signature that indicated its artificial origin. If he could isolate that signature, he could learn to ignore it. The process was agonizing. Jake felt pieces of his enhanced consciousness burning away as he searched for the disruptor's frequency pattern. But gradually he began to separate the artificial chaos from natural quantum information. His tactical awareness slowly returned as he learned to filter out the enemy's mathematical assault. "Target coordinates," Jake wrote with trembling hands. "Disruptor ship in grid 77 Alpha. Destroy it and I can function again." Amy transmitted the targeting information to the coalition fleet. Every available weapon focused on the coordinates Jake had provided. The Zanari disruptor ship exploded in a brilliant flash that could be seen across the entire battle zone. Jake's mind cleared instantly as the quantum assault ended, but the damage had been done. Much of his enhanced processing ability was gone, burned away by the artificial mathematics. He could still see probability patterns, but not with the clarity and precision he had possessed before. "How much capability do you have left?" Amy asked urgently. Jake wrote quickly. "Maybe 30%, enough to provide basic tactical coordination, but not the detailed predictions I could make before." The battle continued for 8 more hours. Jake did his best to guide coalition forces with his reduced abilities while medical teams worked to stabilize his damaged brain. The engagement ended in a costly coalition victory, but everyone knew that Jake's time as a tactical miracle worker was over. That night, as medical technicians monitored Jake's brain activity, Amy sat beside his bed in the ship's medical bay. He was unconscious, but his hand still moved occasionally, as if writing equations in his sleep. Dr. Chen approached with test results and a worried expression. "The quantum attack caused extensive neural damage," she said quietly. "Most of his enhanced processing ability is gone. He may never fully recover." Amy looked at her friend's pale face and felt tears beginning. Jake had sacrificed his miraculous gift to save the fleet, but in losing his enhanced abilities, had he also lost their chance to win the war? Outside the medical bay windows, the stars seemed dimmer somehow. as if the universe itself had lost some of its mathematical beauty. The coalition had won this battle, but the cost had been higher than anyone realized. Their silent genius was silent in a new and more permanent way. Base 7 was built inside a mountain on the planet Xerion Prime. The tunnels went deep into the rock and the air always smelled like metal and dust. Jake Martinez sat at a small table in the mess hall, eating gray protein paste and studying battle reports on his datapad. His notebook lay open beside his tray, filled with new drawings and numbers. For 2 weeks, Jake had been collecting information about every Zanari attack in the past 6 months. Amy Collins helped him get access to the military database. She told the computer technicians that Jake was writing a report for his recovery therapy. The lie worked because most aliens thought humans were simple creatures who needed busy work to feel useful. Jake's pages were covered with mathematical formulas that grew more complex each day. He had discovered that Zanari battle formations followed quantum probability patterns. Each ship moved according to equations that predicted the best possible outcome for every situation. It was like watching a computer play chess against itself. Amy brought her dinner tray and sat across from Jake. She looked tired because she had been working double shifts to cover for soldiers who were sick or wounded. The medical bay was always full these days. "Find anything new?" she asked. Jake wrote quickly in his notebook. "Zanari think in probability clouds. Every decision creates multiple possible futures. They choose the path with highest success rate." Amy read his words twice but still did not understand completely. "That sounds impossible. How can anyone think about all possible futures at the same time?" Jake tapped his pencil against his teeth while he thought. Then he wrote more. "Not impossible, just very advanced, like having a computer in your brain that can calculate millions of outcomes in seconds." "So how do we beat that?" Amy asked. Before Jake could answer, Dr. Lisa Chen walked over to their table. The human scientist was one of only 5 humans at Base 7. She was small and quiet with black hair and thick glasses. Most of the time she worked alone in the research lab, studying alien biology. "May I sit?" Dr. Chen asked politely. Amy moved over to make room. "Of course, Doctor." Dr. Chen sat down and looked at Jake's notebook. "I have been hearing interesting stories about you, Sergeant Martinez. Commander Vexka mentioned that you have been making drawings about enemy tactics." Jake looked at Amy, who nodded encouragement. He turned his notebook so Dr. Chen could see the pages better. Dr. Chen studied the mathematical formulas and battle diagrams. Her eyes grew wide as she read. "This is remarkable," she said softly. "You have identified quantum decision matrices in Zanari behavior patterns." "Where did you learn quantum mathematics?" Jake wrote his answer. "I did not learn it, I can see it now. Since the gas attack, numbers look different to me." Dr. Chen leaned forward with excitement. "The neural damage may have rewired your brain in unexpected ways. Sometimes injury can create new connections between brain regions that were never connected before." Amy interrupted. "Doctor, can you help us understand what Jake is seeing? I think he has found something important, but I cannot follow the math." Dr. Chen nodded eagerly. "I would be honored to help. May I take this notebook to my lab for analysis?" Jake hesitated for a moment, then wrote, "Yes, but I need it back. Still collecting data." "Of course," Dr. Chen said. "I will make copies and return the original tomorrow." The next morning, Dr. Chen found Jake and Amy in the training room. Jake was practicing hand signals with other soldiers, while Amy operated the communication equipment. Dr. Chen waited until the training session ended before approaching them. "Your mathematics are correct," she told Jake. "The Zanari use quantum battlefield coordination. Each unit operates as part of a larger computational system. Their movements are predetermined by probability calculations that optimize for victory." Jake wrote quickly. "So they are predictable?" "Yes and no," Dr. Chen replied. "They are predictable if you can process quantum probability mathematics in real time. But that requires computational power beyond what our computers can handle." Amy looked confused. "Then how does Jake do it?" Dr. Chen smiled. "That is the fascinating part. Jake's brain has apparently developed the ability to process quantum information directly. The damage to his speech center has somehow enhanced his mathematical processing abilities. Jake wrote another question. Can we use this to win battles? Potentially. Yes, Dr. Chen said. But first we need to test your abilities under real combat conditions. And we need to convince the command staff that this is not just fantasy. That afternoon, Dr. Chen arranged a meeting with General Ray Foster, the human commander of coalition forces at Base 7. General Foster was a tough old soldier with gray hair and suspicious eyes. He did not like new ideas, and he especially did not like theories that came from damaged soldiers. Dr. Chen, the general said impatiently, I have real battles to plan. I do not have time for science fiction stories about mind reading. With respect, General, Dr. Chen replied. This is not mind reading. This is mathematical analysis of enemy behavior patterns. Sergeant Martinez has identified the underlying algorithms that control Zanari tactics. General Foster looked at Jake, who sat quietly in his chair holding his notebook. Sergeant, you claim you can predict enemy movements using math. Jake nodded and wrote in his notebook, then showed it to the general. Not predict exactly, but I can see the probability patterns they use to make decisions. If I know their current formation, I can calculate their most likely next moves. Prove it, the general said simply. Dr. Chen had prepared for this moment. She activated a holographic display that showed the last 5 Zanari attacks on coalition bases. Sergeant Martinez, can you show us where the enemy will attack next based on these patterns? Jake studied the display for several minutes. He wrote calculations in his notebook and drew lines connecting different points in space. Finally, he pointed to a star system called Taurus 7. They will attack here, he wrote. 3 days from now, 12 ships in Delta formation approaching from Galactic North. General Foster laughed harshly. Sergeant, there is nothing at Taurus 7 except empty space and a few mining asteroids. Why would the Zanari waste ships attacking nothing? Jake wrote more carefully this time. Because they are not attacking the asteroids. They are positioning for an attack on the coalition supply convoy that will pass through that system in 5 days. The general's laughter stopped. The supply convoy route was classified information that very few people knew about. Jake should not have been able to calculate that information from battle patterns alone. How could you possibly know about the convoy? General Foster demanded. Jake wrote quickly. I do not know about any convoy, but the Zanari attack pattern indicates they are preparing to intercept something valuable that moves on a predictable schedule. Convoys are the only thing that fits the mathematical model. Dr. Chen looked excited. General, we could test this theory easily. Send a reconnaissance team to Taurus 7. If Zanari ships appear as Jake predicted, we will know his abilities are real. General Foster was quiet for a long time. Finally, he nodded slowly. Very well, Doctor. But if this fails, I do not want to hear any more theories about mathematical warfare. 3 days later, coalition scouts detected 12 Zanari ships in Delta formation approaching Taurus 7 from Galactic North, exactly as Jake had predicted. The convoy changed its route and avoided the ambush. For the first time in months, the coalition had outmaneuvered the enemy. That night, Jake sat in his small room writing in his notebook. Amy knocked on his door and came in without waiting for an answer. Everyone is talking about you, she said. They're calling you the Silent Prophet. Jake wrote his response. Not prophet, just good at seeing patterns. Amy smiled. General Foster wants to talk to you again tomorrow. He thinks you might be able to help us win some real battles. Jake looked out his small window at the stars. Somewhere out there, Zanari ships were moving in their perfect mathematical formations. But now Jake could see the equations that controlled them. In his silence, he had found a language that spoke louder than words. The communication equipment on Amy Collins's back weighed 40 pounds, but she carried it without complaint. She followed Jake Martinez up the rocky hill overlooking mining station Omega 7, where coalition forces were preparing for another Zanari attack. This would be the first real test of Jake's mathematical predictions in actual combat. General Ray Foster had given them permission to try Jake's theory on a small scale. If it worked, the general promised to consider larger operations. If it failed, Jake would be transferred to a desk job processing supply reports. Amy could see the tension in Jake's shoulders as he set up his observation equipment on the hilltop. Below them, coalition soldiers from 6 different species were digging defensive positions around the mining station. The facility extracted rare metals needed for spaceship engines, making it a valuable target for the Zanari Empire. Intelligence reports suggested the enemy would attack within the next few hours. Jake opened his notebook and began writing equations while studying the terrain through his binoculars. His enhanced brain processed probability calculations that would have overwhelmed the base's main computer. Amy watched him work and marveled at how focused he had become since losing his voice. "Ready?" Amy asked, checking her communication array. Jake nodded and wrote quickly. "Zanari ships will appear in 17 minutes. 4 heavy cruisers and 8 fighters. They will approach from the eastern valley to avoid our orbital sensors." Amy transmitted this information to the coalition commanders below. She could hear the doubt in their voices as they acknowledged the message. Most of them still thought Jake was just a damaged soldier with delusions of mathematical genius. 16 minutes later, Zanari ships appeared exactly where Jake had predicted. The coalition forces were ready this time. Their defensive weapons opened fire as soon as the enemy ships cleared the valley walls. 2 Zanari fighters exploded before they could react to the unexpected resistance. Jake wrote rapidly in his notebook as he watched the battle develop. "Enemy formation is adapting. They will shift to attack pattern 7 in 30 seconds. Tell ground units to move to positions C through F." Amy relayed the orders. Coalition soldiers ran to new positions just as Zanari plasma beams scorched the ground where they had been standing moments before. The aliens looked surprised that their enemies had anticipated their moves so perfectly. "How do you know what they will do next?" Amy asked during a brief pause in the fighting. Jake wrote while continuing to observe. "They use quantum probability matrices to optimize every decision. Once you understand their mathematical framework, their choices become predictable." The battle continued for 2 hours. Jake provided a constant stream of tactical updates that kept coalition forces one step ahead of their enemies. When Zanari ships tried to flank from the north, Jake had already calculated their approach vector and positioned defenders accordingly. When the enemy attempted a coordinated bombing run, coalition fighters were waiting in exactly the right positions to intercept them. By the end of the engagement, the coalition had achieved something unprecedented, a complete victory against Zanari forces. 7 enemy ships were destroyed while the coalition lost only 1 transport vessel and sustained minimal casualties at the mining station. Commander Vexka climbed the hill to Jake's observation post after the battle ended. The tall Thakari officer's yellow eyes gleamed with excitement, and his tail moved in rapid patterns that indicated amazement. "Remarkable," Commander Vexka said. "In my 40 years of military service, I have never seen anything like this." "How? Did you learn to think like the enemy?" Jake wrote his answer carefully. "I do not think like them. I understand the mathematics they use to think. It is like knowing the rules of a game they are playing." Amy translated Jake's written words for the commander. Commander Vexka studied Jake with new respect. "General Foster wishes to see you immediately. There are larger battles coming and we need every advantage we can find." Back at Base 7, news of the victory had spread quickly through the tunnels. Alien soldiers who had previously ignored Jake now watched him with curious eyes as he walked through the corridors. Some of them whispered about the silent human who could predict the future. General Foster was waiting in the command center with Dr. Lisa Chen and several high-ranking officers from different coalition species. The room fell silent when Jake and Amy entered. Jake felt uncomfortable being the center of attention, but he knew this was important. "Sergeant Martinez," General Foster began, "your performance today was extraordinary. The victory at Omega 7 was our first significant success against Zanari, forces in over a year." Jake nodded politely and waited for the general to continue. "However," General Foster said, "we need to understand the limitations of your abilities. Can you maintain this level of tactical prediction in larger engagements?" Jake wrote thoughtfully before answering. "The mathematics become more complex with more ships and variables, but the basic patterns remain the same. I believe I can handle larger battles if I have sufficient observation time and good communication support. Dr. Chen spoke up from her position near the holographic display. There is something else we need to consider. The Zanari are highly adaptive. They will eventually notice that their tactical advantages are being neutralized, and they will modify their approach. What does that mean for us? Asked Colonel Sarah Wright, a human intelligence officer. Jake wrote quickly. They will try to introduce random elements into their formations to disrupt my calculations. But truly, random behavior reduces their efficiency. They cannot maintain their tactical superiority without their mathematical coordination. General, Foster leaned forward with interest. So we force them to choose between being predictable or being ineffective? Exactly, Amy said, reading from Jake's notebook. Either way, we gain an advantage. The meeting continued for 3 more hours as the command staff planned larger operations based on Jake's tactical insights. Jake found himself writing almost constantly as officers from different species asked questions about Zanari behavior patterns and probability calculations. Late that night, Jake sat alone in his quarters, reviewing the day's events. His notebook was filled with new observations about how different coalition species reacted to his predictions. The Altarians trusted his mathematics immediately because their culture valued logical thinking. The Norvax were more skeptical, but followed orders once they saw results. The Thakari respected strength and success above all else. Amy knocked and entered without waiting for permission, as had become her habit. She brought 2 cups of coffee from the human section of the mess hall. Everyone is talking about you, she said, sitting on Jake's spare chair. They are calling you the math wizard now. Jake wrote his response. I do not like the attention. I just want to help win this war so we can all go home. Amy smiled. Well, you are definitely helping. General Foster says the Coalition High Command wants to meet with you next week. They are planning something big. Jake looked worried and wrote quickly. I hope I can live up to their expectations. The mathematics work perfectly in theory, but war is unpredictable. There are always variables I cannot calculate. Like what? Amy asked. Jake thought for a moment before writing. Human intuition, alien emotions, random equipment failures, acts of courage or cowardice that do not follow logical patterns. Mathematics can predict probability, but it cannot predict individual choices. Amy read his words and nodded slowly. That is what makes us different from the Zanari, is it not? They rely completely on calculations while we still have room for surprises. Jake smiled for the first time all day and wrote one more line. Maybe that will be enough. Outside his small window, the stars looked peaceful in their ancient patterns. But Jake knew that among those distant lights, Zanari commanders were already analyzing their defeat at Omega 7. They would be modifying their algorithms and adjusting their probability matrices to account for this new variable in their calculations. The war was about to become much more complicated. But for tonight, the coalition had hope again. And in his notebook, Jake Martinez was already working on equations that might change the course of history. The red dirt of Kepler 442b stuck to everything like blood. Jake Martinez wiped his face with a dirty cloth, but the dust kept coming back. His hands shook as he cleaned his rifle for the 3rd time that morning. Around him, soldiers from different alien worlds packed their gear in silence. Everyone knew they were losing this war badly. The Zanari Empire had taken another coalition base yesterday. That made 7 bases in 2 weeks. Jake watched the tall, blue-skinned Altarians loading their energy weapons onto transport ships. Their long faces looked sad and tired. The short gray Norvax moved quickly between the tents, their big eyes darting around like scared animals. Even the tough reptilian Thakari soldiers seemed worried as they rolled up their sleeping mats. Jake wanted to tell them it would be okay, but he could not speak. 3 weeks ago, Zanari gas bombs had hit his patrol. The green poison had burned his throat so badly that the doctors said his voice was gone forever. The alien medics had tried their best, but human bodies were different from theirs. They could not fix what the gas had broken. Private Amy Collins sat down next to Jake on a broken piece of concrete. She was the only other human in their squad of 12 soldiers. Her brown hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, and her uniform was as dirty as everyone else's. She looked at Jake with kind eyes and smiled a little. "Another retreat," she said quietly. "Commander Vexka says we are moving to Base 7 tomorrow morning." Jake nodded and pointed to his notebook. He had started writing things down since he lost his voice. Amy looked at the page where he had drawn a map of their last 3 battles. She could see arrows and numbers but did not understand what they meant. "What is this?" she asked. Jake took the pencil and wrote slowly. "Zanari attack patterns, same every time." Amy studied the drawings more carefully. Jake had marked where the enemy ships had appeared and which direction they had moved. He had drawn lines connecting different points and written small numbers next to each line. It looked like a math problem, but Amy was not good at math. "You think they follow some kind of plan?" she asked. Jake wrote again. "Not plan. Pattern, like music or dance." Before Amy could ask more questions, Commander Vexka walked over to them. The Thakari officer was 8 feet tall with green scales and yellow eyes. His long tail moved back and forth when he was angry or worried. Right now it was moving a lot. "Martinez," the commander said in his deep voice. "Report to Medical Bay 3. Dr. Keth wants to examine you again." Jake stood up and saluted. He had learned that saluting was the same for all species in the coalition. Commander Vexka looked at the notebook in Jake's hand and his yellow eyes narrowed. "What is that?" he demanded. Amy spoke quickly. "Just notes, sir. Jake writes things down since he cannot speak." Commander Vexka held out his scaly hand. "Give it to me." Jake hesitated but handed over the notebook. The commander flipped through the pages, looking at the drawings and numbers. His tail moved faster as he turned each page. "Nonsense," he said finally. "Random scribbles from a damaged soldier." He started to close the notebook, but Amy stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, Jake was our best tactics student back on Earth. He graduated top of his class at the military academy." The commander's eyes moved between Amy and Jake. "That was before the gas attack. Brain damage often causes strange behaviors. Soldiers see patterns that do not exist." He handed the notebook back to Jake. "Focus on getting better, Martinez. Leave the war planning to officers who can think clearly." Jake took his notebook and nodded. He did not look angry or upset. Amy watched his face and saw something else there. He looked like he was thinking about something important. After the commander walked away, Amy sat back down next to Jake. "Show me again," she said. "Show me what you see." Jake opened his notebook to a fresh page. He drew a circle and divided it into sections like a pie. Then he wrote numbers in each section. He showed Amy how the Zanari ships always appeared in the same mathematical relationship to each other. Their formations were not random at all. "They move like parts of a machine," Jake wrote. "Every attack follows the same math." Amy tried to understand, but it was difficult. She was a good soldier and could fix almost any weapon, but numbers and patterns made her head hurt. Still, she trusted Jake. He had saved her life twice during their training on Earth and once since they arrived on this planet. "What do you want to do about it?" she asked. Jake wrote for a long time. "If we can predict where they will attack, we can be ready. If we know their pattern, we can break it." The transport ships were loading now and soldiers were climbing aboard. Amy and Jake packed their gear and joined the line. Around them, aliens spoke in their own languages. The Altarians made musical sounds like singing. The Norvax clicked and whistled. The Thakari growled and hissed. Jake listened to all of it and wrote more notes. As their transport ship lifted off from the red planet, Jake pressed his face to the small window. Far above them, the black shapes of Zanari warships moved between the stars. They looked like sharks swimming in dark water. Jake watched them carefully and wrote more numbers in his notebook. Amy looked over his shoulder. "What now?" Jake wrote one word. "Wait." The ship flew through space toward Base 7. Inside, soldiers from a dozen different worlds sat together in worried silence. Most of them thought the war was already lost. The Zanari were too strong and too smart. Their technology was better and their tactics were perfect. But Jake Martinez saw something different. In the silence of his damaged throat, he was beginning to understand something that might change everything. The enemy's greatest strength might also be their greatest weakness. He just needed time to prove it. The transport ship disappeared into the darkness between stars, carrying its cargo of tired soldiers toward another hopeless battle. But this time, one of those soldiers carried something new. In his quiet mind and his small notebook, Jake held the first piece of a puzzle that would decide the fate of the galaxy. Jake Martinez woke up in the medical bay 3 days after the Battle of Titan's Ring. His head felt empty and quiet in a way that had nothing to do with his lost voice. The quantum processing abilities that had made him special were mostly gone, burned away by the Zanari mathematical weapon. When he tried to see probability patterns, he found only fragments and shadows of his former gift. Amy Collins sat beside his bed reading casualty reports. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep and worry. The Coalition had won at Titan's Ring, but the cost had been enormous. 140 ships destroyed, thousands of crew members dead or wounded, and their secret weapon permanently damaged. "How do you feel?" Amy asked when she noticed Jake was awake. Jake reached for his notebook with shaking hands. His writing was less steady than before, but still legible. Different. The mathematics are still there, but far away now, like trying to remember a dream after waking up. Dr. Lisa Chen appeared with her medical scanner and began checking Jake's neural activity. The readings showed extensive damage to the areas of his brain that had been enhanced since the original gas attack. Most of the quantum processing pathways were dead tissue now. "I am sorry, Jake," Dr. Chen said sadly. "The weapon was specifically designed to target enhanced consciousness. You may recover some basic functions over time, but the advanced abilities are gone," Jake wrote in his notebook. "How is the war going?" Amy's expression grew dark. "Not well. Without your tactical guidance, we are losing battles again. The Zanari have regrouped and are launching massive attacks on Coalition homeworlds. Intelligence. Estimates we have maybe 2 weeks before they break through to Earth." Jake closed his eyes and tried to reach into his damaged mind for any remaining fragments of quantum awareness. Deep in the burned ruins of his enhanced consciousness, he found something unexpected. Not the complex mathematical processing he had lost, but a simple and terrible understanding. He wrote quickly, his pencil moving across the page with sudden urgency. "The quantum disruptor showed me something important. The Zanari do not just use mathematics for tactics. Their entire consciousness is quantum-based. Every thought, every decision, every brain function depends on quantum coordination." Dr. Chen read his words and her eyes widened. "You mean their minds are literally quantum computers?" Jake nodded and continued writing. "Not computers. Quantum consciousness networks. All Zanari minds are connected through quantum entanglement. That is why their coordination is so perfect." Amy leaned forward with excitement. "If their minds are connected, then they have a central weakness. Disrupt the network, and you disrupt all of them." Jake wrote more slowly, thinking through the implications. "Yes, but the disruption would need to be introduced at the quantum level. A mathematical virus that spreads through their consciousness network. It would require someone to interface directly with their quantum matrix." "That sounds incredibly dangerous," Dr. Chen said. "Direct interface with alien quantum consciousness could destroy a human mind completely." Jake looked at his two friends and wrote the words that would change everything. "My mind is already damaged. I have nothing left to lose, and I still have enough quantum sensitivity to make the connection." Amy stood up abruptly. "No, absolutely not. You are not sacrificing yourself on another desperate plan," Jake wrote patiently. "Amy, this is not sacrifice, this is mathematics. The Zanari consciousness network has a fundamental vulnerability. If I can introduce a paradox equation into their quantum matrix, it will create infinite loops that collapse their coordination. The war ends in hours instead of years." Dr. Chen was already thinking through the technical requirements. "You would need to be physically connected to their quantum network. That means being captured and allowing them to link you to their consciousness matrix for study." "Captured on purpose," Amy said with growing horror. "You want to surrender yourself to the enemy," Jake wrote quickly. "Not surrender. Strategic infiltration. We stage a reconnaissance mission that appears to fail. The Zanari capture us for interrogation. They will want to study my damaged brain to understand how I was able to predict their tactics. Amy shook her head firmly. I said us. If you are doing this insane plan, I am going with you. Jake started to write a protest, but Amy interrupted. Do not even think about arguing. You need someone to operate communications equipment and provide backup. Besides, someone has to make sure you actually complete the mission instead of sacrificing yourself heroically. 3 days later, Jake and Amy sat in a small reconnaissance ship approaching the Zanari home system. Their mission was officially listed as deep intelligence gathering, but everyone involved knew it was really a suicide run. General Ray Foster had approved the plan only because the alternative was certain defeat. The ship's systems were programmed to fail at a specific time, making their capture appear accidental. Jake carried a concealed data pad with the mathematical virus he had spent days developing. The equation was simple but devastating, a logical paradox that would create infinite loops in any quantum consciousness that tried to process it. Are you ready? Amy asked as Zanari patrol ships appeared on their sensors. Jake wrote in his notebook one last time. Ready. Remember, when they connect me to their network, you need to create a distraction. I will only have a few seconds to introduce the virus. The Zanari ships surrounded them and disabled their engines with precision energy beams. Within minutes, Jake and Amy were prisoners aboard an alien warship heading toward the heart of the enemy empire. The Zanari command ship was a marvel of quantum architecture. Everything was connected to everything else through invisible networks of entangled particles. Jake could feel the presence of thousands of alien minds linked together in perfect mathematical harmony. It was beautiful and terrifying. The Zanari commander was a tall being with crystalline skin that reflected light in complex patterns. When it spoke, its words came not from vocal cords but from quantum vibrations that translated directly into understanding. The damaged human who learned to see our patterns, the commander said. We have been most curious about your modifications. You will be connected to our consciousness network for detailed analysis. Jake nodded calmly while Amy pretended to struggle against her restraints. The Zanari technicians began preparing the quantum interface equipment. Jake could see the connection cables that would link his brain directly to their consciousness matrix. This may cause some discomfort, the commander explained, as the technicians attached monitoring devices to Jake's head. Your primitive neural structure was not designed for quantum consciousness. The connection activated and Jake's mind exploded into a space filled with millions of linked thoughts. He found himself swimming in an ocean of quantum awareness where every Zanari consciousness existed as part of a single vast intelligence. The mathematical beauty was overwhelming. But Jake was not there to admire their achievements. Deep in his damaged brain, he activated the data pad and released his mathematical virus into the network. The paradox equation spread through the quantum matrix like wildfire. Every Zanari consciousness that encountered it became trapped in infinite, logical loops. Their perfect coordination collapsed as their linked minds struggled to process an impossible mathematical statement. Across the galaxy, Zanari ships suddenly stopped their attacks as their crews lost consciousness. The quantum network that had been their greatest strength became their ultimate weakness as the virus propagated through every connected mind. Amy broke free from her restraints as the Zanari guards collapsed, their crystalline skin flickering, with chaotic light patterns. She ran to Jake, who was still connected to the failing network. Blood was streaming from his nose again, but his eyes were peaceful. Jake, disconnect. The virus is working. We need to get out of here. Jake wrote weakly in his notebook. Cannot disconnect safely. Network is collapsing. Will take me with it. Amy grabbed the connection cables and yanked them free, not caring about the danger. Jake collapsed, but he was still breathing. Around them, the Zanari command ship drifted powerless as its crew lay unconscious. The rescue came 2 hours later when coalition ships arrived to find the entire Zanari fleet floating, dead in space. The war was over. Billions of lives had been saved by a simple mathematical equation introduced by a silent soldier who understood that sometimes the greatest victories come from accepting the smallest defeats. 6 months later, Jake Martinez sat on a bench outside a small school in rural Ohio. Children ran past him during recess, laughing and playing games that had no mathematical rules. His notebook lay open beside him, filled with basic arithmetic problems and simple geometry lessons. Amy sat down next to him with 2 cups of coffee. She taught history at the same school and often joined Jake during breaks from her classes. "Any regrets?" she asked, watching the children play. Jake wrote in his notebook with steady hands. "None. I lost the ability to see quantum patterns, but I gained something better. I can teach children to love mathematics without showing them how dangerous it can be." Amy smiled and looked up at the peaceful sky. Somewhere among those blue depths, the galaxy was rebuilding. Former enemies were learning to work together, and in schools across hundreds of worlds,